The coffee in Corporal Jake Morrison's mug had achieved the consistency of synthetic motor oil 3 hours ago, but he continued sipping it anyway because even terrible coffee was better than no coffee during the graveyard shift aboard Kepler 7. The Deep Space Monitoring Station hung in the void like a metallic spider, its sensor arrays reaching into the darkness between stars, eternally vigilant for threats that Jake had begun to suspect existed only in the paranoid imaginations of Earth Command bureaucrats. Sector 7 Alpha remains clear, he muttered into his headset, watching the holographic display rotate slowly before him. Green dots indicated friendly vessels, red ones meant trouble, and after 6 months of staring at this same screen, Jake could confidently report that the universe was disappointingly peaceful. Still no sign of the great alien invasion fleet everyone's worried about. The observation deck stretched around him in a circle of reinforced transparent steel, offering a 360-degree view of absolutely nothing interesting. Stars glittered like scattered diamonds against black velvet, beautiful but static. Jake had initially found the vista inspiring, but inspiration wore thin when your job involved counting the same constellations every night while waiting for something that would probably never happen. A soft hiss announced the opening of the deck's access hatch. Jake glanced up, expecting to see Rodriguez arriving early for the next shift, but instead found himself looking at Zara Kethvel, one of the 3 Vellani liaisons assigned to the station. Her ears, elegantly pointed and slightly longer than human proportions would suggest, twitched almost imperceptibly as she scanned the empty observation deck. "Evening, Zara," Jake said, raising his coffee mug in greeting. "Couldn't sleep either." She moved with fluid grace toward the central console, her standard-issue jumpsuit unable to hide the subtle differences in her anatomy. The Vellani possessed an almost feline economy of movement, each step deliberate and purposeful. Jake had noticed this about all 3 liaisons, though he'd never mentioned it to anyone. Commenting on alien physiology seemed like the sort of thing that might earn him a lecture from the cultural sensitivity officer. "Sleep remains elusive," Zara replied, her voice carrying that melodic quality common to her species. The universal translators built into their communication systems handled the language conversion, but couldn't quite mask the underlying music in Vellani speech patterns. Your human concept of circadian rhythms does not align well with standard station scheduling. Jake chuckled. "Tell me about it. Whoever designed these shift rotations clearly never tried to stay awake for 18 hours straight while staring at empty space. I'm pretty sure my eyeballs have permanently adjusted to the shape of this monitor. Perhaps that explains your species' tendency toward rectangular architecture," Zara said, and Jake detected what might have been humor in her tone. "Everything designed to match your square eyes. Hey, our architecture isn't that bad, though I'll grant you the mess hall looks like someone built it with children's blocks." Jake gestured toward the viewport. "What brings you up here? Usually you folks keep to the lower decks." Zara's ears twitched again, more pronounced this time. Her luminous green eyes darted toward the access hatch, then back to Jake. "I wish to observe the stellar formations from this vantage point. Your human navigation systems interpret stellar cartography differently than ours." Something in her posture suggested this wasn't entirely truthful. Jake had developed a reasonably good eye for reading body language during his years in the service, and Zara exhibited all the signs of someone operating under considerable stress. Her breathing was slightly elevated, her hands kept returning to fidget with something in her pocket, and she'd positioned herself with clear lines of sight to both the hatch and the emergency exits. "Stellar cartography, huh?" Jake said. "Well, you're welcome to stay. Fair warning, though, the entertainment value peaks somewhere around hour 2. After that, it's just you, the coffee dispenser, and whatever philosophical insights you can extract from watching rocks float in vacuum." Zara approached the central console where Jake sat, her movements becoming increasingly agitated. The fingers of her right hand drummed against her thigh in a rapid staccato pattern that definitely wasn't casual behavior. "Corporal Morrison," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "may I ask you something?" "Sure, shoot." "In your military training, did they teach you about operational security?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Of course, why?" Zara glanced around the empty observation deck once more, then moved closer to Jake's station. The familiar hum of the environmental system seemed suddenly louder, and Jake became acutely aware of every shadow cast by the console displays. "If someone were to entrust you with something important," Zara said, "something that others might seek to obtain, would you be able to keep such knowledge secure?" "That's a pretty loaded question," Jake replied. "Depends on what we're talking about. I mean, if you're asking whether I'd help you hide contraband chocolate from the mess hall, absolutely. If you're asking whether I'd help you smuggle weapons to insurgent groups, that's a different conversation entirely." Despite her obvious tension, Zara's mouth quirked upward slightly. "Chocolate is not contraband aboard this station. Have you tried the stuff they serve in the mess? Trust me, it should be." Jake set down his coffee mug and gave Zara his full attention. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but you're clearly worried about something. If there's a problem, maybe I can help." Zara studied his face for a long moment, her green eyes searching for something Jake couldn't identify. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, because her expression shifted from wary uncertainty to grim determination. "Don't tell anyone," she whispered, pressing something small and warm into Jake's palm. Before Jake could respond, before he could even look at what she'd given him, Zara had already turned and was walking rapidly toward the maintenance hatch at the far end of the observation deck. Her elongated ears lay flat against her head, and she moved with the purposeful stride of someone who had just made a decision they couldn't take back. "Zara, wait," Jake called, but she'd already disappeared into the service tunnels that honeycombed the station's interior structure. Jake looked down at his palm and felt his breath catch. Resting against his skin was a crystal no larger than his thumbnail, perfectly clear except for the soft blue-white light that pulsed gently within its faceted core. The thing was warm to the touch, almost organic in the way it seemed to respond to his body heat. As he watched, the internal luminescence shifted and swirled like captured starlight. "Well," Jake muttered to the empty observation deck, "this is either the most expensive paperweight in human space, or my quiet evening just got significantly more complicated." The crystal's glow intensified slightly, as if responding to his voice, and Jake realized that whatever Zara had just made him a part of, it was definitely going to be more interesting than watching empty sectors of space. He just hoped interesting didn't turn out to be synonymous with dangerous, though his experience suggested that when beautiful alien women started pressing mysterious glowing objects into your hand, danger was usually somewhere in the vicinity, probably wearing a disguise and carrying a very large weapon. Jake discovered that trying to concentrate on sensor readings while carrying a pocket-sized alien disco ball was remarkably difficult. The crystal had been humming for the past 2 hours, a barely perceptible vibration that seemed to resonate through his bones every time he moved. He'd initially tried to ignore it, but the thing had developed an annoying habit of brightening whenever he approached certain sections of the monitoring station. "Sector 12 Gamma showing normal readings," he reported into his headset, while simultaneously wondering if normal alien artifacts were supposed to glow brighter when exposed to communication arrays. The crystal had practically lit up his entire pocket when he'd walked past the primary transmitter array an hour ago. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the comm system. "Hey Morrison, you sound weird tonight. You getting enough sleep?" "Just tired," Jake replied, which wasn't entirely untrue. It was difficult to feel well-rested when you were carrying what appeared to be a piece of alien technology that might or might not be preparing to explode, transform into a monster, or contact its home planet. "How's the perimeter sweep going?" "Boring as usual. though I swear the Velani quarters are getting more active lately. Saw 3 of them heading toward the restricted sections about an hour ago. Probably conducting some kind of weird ritual involving their processed food paste. Jake felt the crystal pulse more intensively against his leg. Restricted sections. Yeah, the communications hub that command doesn't want us regular folks messing with. I figure they're probably trying to call home and complain about our terrible Wi-Fi speeds. Can't say I blame them. This station's internet connection makes dial-up look advanced. The crystal's humming intensified to the point where Jake worried others might hear it. He pressed his hand against his pocket, trying to muffle the sound, but the vibration only seemed to grow stronger. Rodriguez, I'm going to take a quick break to check the environmental systems, Jake said. Cover my sector for 10 minutes. Sure thing. Try not to get lost in the ventilation ducts again. Maintenance still hasn't forgiven you for that incident last month. Jake ended the connection and stood up, immediately noticing that the crystal's glow had become visible through the fabric of his jumpsuit. The soft blue-white light created an unmistakable bulge in his pocket that would be difficult to explain if anyone asked. He needed to find somewhere private to examine this thing properly, preferably before it decided to announce its presence to the entire station. The corridor outside the observation deck was empty, illuminated by the standard-issue lighting strips that cast everything in a slightly greenish tint. Jake had always suspected the station's designers had chosen the color specifically to make everyone look slightly nauseous, possibly as a cost-saving measure on medical facilities. He made his way toward the auxiliary storage areas, reasoning that if he was going to have a private conversation with an alien artifact, he might as well do it somewhere that offered both privacy and quick access to emergency exits. The crystal seemed to approve of this direction, its humming settling into a more regular rhythm that almost sounded like purring. The storage bay Jake selected was filled with spare environmental suits and emergency rations that expired sometime during the previous decade. He sealed the hatch behind him and finally pulled the crystal from his pocket, holding it up to the light. "Okay, little guy," he said to the glowing object. "What exactly are you supposed to be doing?" The crystal's response was immediate and alarming. The gentle blue-white glow suddenly shifted to a deep amber color, and Jake felt a strange, tingling sensation spread up his arm. For a moment, he could have sworn he heard whispers in a language that wasn't quite Velani and definitely wasn't human. "That's either very good or very bad," Jake muttered. "In my experience, glowing alien objects that respond to direct questions usually fall into the extremely dangerous category." The crystal pulsed once, almost as if it was laughing at him. Jake was about to continue his one-sided conversation when the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. He quickly shoved the crystal back into his pocket and began rummaging through the emergency rations, trying to look like someone conducting a legitimate inventory check. The hatch cycled open to reveal Sergeant Kim, the station's head of security, accompanied by 2 junior officers Jake didn't recognize. Kim was a compact woman with the sort of perpetually skeptical expression that suggested she'd caught every lie ever told aboard the station and was personally offended by each one. "Morrison," Kim said, her tone suggesting she'd found him somewhere he shouldn't be. "What are you doing in Storage Bay 7? "Checking expiration dates on the emergency rations," Jake replied, holding up a package that claimed to contain something called beef flavor product. "Did you know some of this stuff expired before the station was even commissioned? I'm starting to think the quartermaster has a sense of humor." One of the junior officers snorted. "Either that, or command figures if we're desperate enough to eat emergency rations. We won't care if they're technically classified as archaeological artifacts." Kim shot the officer a look that could have frozen plasma. "We're conducting routine security sweeps. Have you noticed anything unusual during your shift?" The crystal in Jake's pocket seemed to vibrate with what felt suspiciously like amusement. "Define unusual," Jake said. Because if you mean more boring than watching paint dry in a vacuum, then no. If you mean weird enough to make me question my career choices, then that's just Tuesday on Kepler 7. Any unauthorized personnel in restricted areas, unusual communications traffic, equipment malfunctions. Kim's questions had the practiced cadence of someone working from a checklist. Jake shook his head, trying to project the appropriate level of bored confusion. Nothing like that, though Rodriguez mentioned seeing some of the Vellani heading toward the comm hub earlier, but they've got clearance for those areas, right? Kim and her officers exchanged glances. The crystal's vibration intensified, and Jake began to worry that its glow might become visible through his pocket again. Right, Kim said, though something in her tone suggested this wasn't entirely accurate. Well, if you notice anything out of the ordinary, report it immediately. And Morrison, next time you want to check supply inventories, coordinate with the duty officer first. Will do, Sergeant. Kim and her team moved on, their footsteps fading down the corridor. Jake waited until he was certain they were gone before pulling out the crystal again. The amber glow had returned to its original blue-white, but the intensity had definitely increased. I don't suppose you'd care to explain why Sergeant Kim is suddenly interested in Vellani movements? Jake asked the crystal, because I'm starting to get the impression that you're not just a pretty light show. The crystal pulsed once, then twice, then settled into a rapid staccato pattern that reminded Jake uncomfortably of a distress signal. Whatever Zara had given him, it was definitely more than a simple token of friendship. The question was whether he was now carrying evidence of something important, or whether he'd just become an unwitting participant in what might charitably be described as an interstellar incident. Either way, Jake realized, his quiet evening shift had definitely taken a turn toward the interesting. He just hoped that, when the excitement was over, he'd still be in a position to appreciate the irony. Jake's attempt to return to his monitoring duties was interrupted by the crystal deciding to perform what could only be described as an interpretive dance inside his pocket. The thing had developed a rhythm that seemed to correspond with the station's power fluctuations, pulsing brighter every time the main generators cycled through their maintenance routines. This is either the most advanced alien technology in the galaxy, or the universe's most expensive mood ring, Jake muttered, trying to adjust his position so the glow wouldn't be visible to anyone passing by the observation deck. The problem with carrying mysterious alien artifacts, Jake was discovering, was that they had absolutely no respect for human work schedules. Every few minutes, the crystal would emit a soft chime that sounded suspiciously like the notification tone from his personal communicator, causing him to check his messages only to find nothing there. After the fifth false alarm, he was beginning to suspect the thing was deliberately messing with him. "Attention, all personnel," Commander Hayes's voice echoed through the station's intercom system. "We'll be conducting routine maintenance on the communication arrays during the next shift cycle. All non-essential personnel should avoid decks 4 through 6 during this period." Jake felt the crystal practically leap out of his pocket. The intensity of its glow increased dramatically, and for a moment he could have sworn he heard what sounded like Vellani voices speaking in rapid, urgent tones. The universal translator wasn't picking up anything, but the emotion behind the words was unmistakable: alarm. "Well, that's not ominous at all," Jake said to the crystal. "I don't suppose you'd like to share what's got you so excited about communication array maintenance?" Before the crystal could respond with whatever passed for alien artifact communication, Jake's headset crackled to life with Rodriguez's voice. "Hey Morrison, you seeing this energy spike on the sensors? Something's making the gravitic detection grid think there's a small moon hiding behind the station." Jake checked his displays, noting the anomalous readings that had appeared in the past few minutes. The sensor array was detecting gravitational disturbances that shouldn't exist unless someone had decided to park a large spacecraft in the station's sensor shadow. "Could be a calibration error," Jake replied, though he suspected that wasn't the case. The crystal's behavior suggested something more significant was happening. When's the last time we ran diagnostics on the gravitic sensors? About 3 weeks ago. Everything checked out fine then. But these readings look like something big just dropped out of hyperspace about 10,000 kilometers off our port side. Problem is, there's nothing there. Jake glanced toward the viewport, noting that the starfield looked exactly the same as it had for the past 6 months. No new lights, no obvious spacecraft, nothing to explain the sensor anomalies. But the crystal in his pocket was now vibrating with enough intensity to make his leg go numb. "I'll run a full diagnostic on the detection grid," Jake said. "Could be interference from the communication array maintenance." "Yeah, probably. Though I've never seen maintenance work that could make our sensors hallucinate entire spacecraft. Unless they're using some kind of new quantum wrench that violates the laws of physics." Jake ended the connection and pulled out the crystal, noting that its glow had shifted to a deep red color that definitely hadn't been in its previous repertoire. The thing was warm enough now that he could feel the heat through his jumpsuit, and the humming had evolved into what sounded almost like music. "Okay, I get it," Jake said to the crystal. "Something important is happening. Care to be a little more specific? Because cryptic alien artifacts are all well and good, but I could use some actual information here." The crystal's response was to project a brief holographic image into the air above Jake's palm. The projection lasted only a few seconds, but it was long enough for him to recognize the outline of the station and what appeared to be a cloaked vessel approaching from the direction of the outer sensor perimeter. "A cloaked ship," Jake said. "Fantastic, because what this situation really needed was invisible spacecraft and secret rendezvous. Next you'll be telling me there are space pirates involved." The crystal pulsed once, almost apologetically. "Please tell me that wasn't a confirmation." Jake was contemplating the implications of invisible spacecraft when the observation deck's access hatch cycled open. He quickly palmed the crystal, expecting to see Rodriguez or another crew member, but instead found himself face to face with Zara. Her elongated ears were laid back flat against her head, and her luminous green eyes held an expression of barely controlled panic. "Corporal Morrison," she said, moving quickly toward his station. "We need to discuss that item I entrusted to your care." "You mean the alien disco ball that's been giving me a light show all evening?" Jake held up the crystal, which immediately began glowing brighter in response to Zara's presence. "Because I have to say, your people's idea of gift-giving is definitely more exciting than anything I got for my birthday." Zara's ears twitched, and despite her obvious stress, Jake caught what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Your birthday gifts do not typically contain memory cores capable of accessing quantum-encrypted data networks." "Not usually, no. Though my aunt did give me a sweater once that I'm pretty sure violated several laws of thermodynamics. It was either the world's most advanced heating system, or it was slowly consuming my body heat to power some kind of interdimensional portal." "This is not the time for humor, Corporal." "But in my experience, this is exactly the time for humor. Mysterious alien artifacts, cloaked spacecraft, and security sweeps looking for unauthorized Vellani activity. If I don't laugh about this situation, I'm going to start hyperventilating." Zara moved closer to Jake's station, her movements careful and deliberate. "The device you carry contains information that certain parties would prefer to remain hidden. Evidence of activities that violate the treaties between our peoples." "What kind of activities?" "The kind that could restart the war between humans and Vellani if they became public knowledge. The kind that involve illegal weapons testing on inhabited worlds, conducted by organizations that officially do not exist." Jake felt the crystal's temperature increase against his palm. "Shadow organizations conducting illegal weapons tests. Why does nothing in my life ever turn out to be simple? Why can't I just once encounter an alien artifact that does something useful, like automatically filing my duty reports, or making the mess hall coffee taste less like industrial solvent. Because, Zara said, and now Jake was certain she was trying not to smile, useful alien artifacts are far less interesting than ones that threaten to expose galaxy-spanning conspiracies. Point taken. So what exactly are we supposed to do with this thing? Before Zara could answer, the station's lighting flickered and the artificial gravity fluctuated just enough to make Jake's stomach lurch. The crystal's glow intensified dramatically, and Jake could hear the distant sound of emergency klaxons beginning to sound from somewhere deep within the station. I believe, Zara said, her ears now standing fully upright in alert position, we are about to discover that the situation has become significantly more complicated. Jake looked at the crystal, which was now pulsing in sync with the emergency alarms, then at Zara, whose expression suggested she'd been expecting this development. Please tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve us getting shot by mysterious space pirates or arrested for possession of stolen alien technology. I have a plan, Zara said. Whether it involves avoiding arrest or combat remains to be seen. But first, we need to reach the communication arrays before the maintenance team discovers what they are actually looking for. Jake pocketed the crystal and stood up from his station. Right. Secret mission to save the galaxy it is then. Though I feel compelled to point out that my job description specifically mentioned routine monitoring duties and made no reference whatsoever to preventing interstellar incidents. Consider it an opportunity for career advancement, Zara said, heading toward the maintenance access that would take them deeper into the station's restricted areas. Somehow, Jake muttered, following her toward what was almost certainly going to be either the most exciting or the most terrifying night of his career. I don't think Command is going to see it that way. Jake had always imagined that saving the galaxy would involve more heroic speeches and fewer crawling through maintenance ducts that smelled like recycled air and broken dreams. The crystal in his pocket had developed what he could only describe as navigational opinions, growing warm when they moved in the right direction and practically freezing when Zara suggested taking alternate routes through the station's mechanical sections. Your people's technology has a very strong sense of direction, Jake whispered as they approached the communication hub through a service tunnel barely wide enough for one person. Either that, or this thing really doesn't like being underground. Vellani memory cores are designed to seek optimal transmission conditions, Zara replied, her elongated ears swiveling to track sounds from the corridor ahead. They become agitated when separated from communication networks for extended periods. So what you're telling me is that I've been carrying the alien equivalent of a teenager who's been cut off from social media. No wonder it's been so moody. Despite their precarious situation, Zara's mouth quirked upward. That is perhaps the most accurate description of quantum-encrypted memory core behavior I have ever heard. They emerged from the maintenance tunnel into a corridor Jake had never seen before, lined with access panels and monitoring stations that hummed with barely contained energy. The crystal's glow was now visible even through the fabric of his jumpsuit, creating a soft blue-white nimbus that made him look like he was smuggling a small star. How exactly are we supposed to upload this thing's data without anyone noticing? Jake asked. Because I'm pretty sure walking into the communication hub while glowing like a human-shaped lighthouse is going to attract some attention. The memory core will interface directly with the transmission array once we establish physical contact. The process should take no more than 30 seconds. Should take 30 seconds. Famous last words if I've ever heard them. Right up there with, what's the worst that could happen, and it's probably nothing. They reached the entrance to the communication hub to find it sealed with an electronic lock that was definitely not part of the station's standard security protocols. Through the reinforced viewport, Jake could see figures in unmarked uniforms working on equipment that looked considerably more advanced than anything in Kepler-7's inventory. Well, that's not suspicious at all, Jake muttered. though I have to admire their commitment to the whole routine maintenance cover story. Nothing says routine like completely replacing the communication array with what appears to be military-grade quantum encryption hardware. Zara pressed her face to the viewport, studying the activity inside. They are attempting to establish a direct link to the memory core's data stream. If they succeed, they will be able to trace its location and retrieve it before we can transmit the evidence. In that case, I vote we find another way in. Preferably one that doesn't involve walking directly into a room full of people who are probably armed and definitely not interested in reasonable negotiations. The crystal chose that moment to emit a sound Jake had never heard before, a melodic chime that seemed to harmonize with the station's power systems. The effect was immediate and alarming. Every electronic lock in the corridor cycled open simultaneously, including the one sealing the communication hub. Did it just hack the entire security system? Jake asked. Velani memory cores are designed to integrate with any available technology network. It appears yours has decided to be helpful. Helpful, right, because nothing says helpful like setting off every security alarm on the station. Jake could already hear the distant sound of emergency klaxons beginning to wail. I don't suppose your people's idea of helpful includes an exit strategy. Before Zara could answer, the door to the communication hub slid open and Commander Hayes stepped into the corridor, flanked by the unmarked personnel Jake had observed through the viewport. Hayes's expression suggested he'd been expecting this encounter, though he didn't look particularly happy about it. "Corporal Morrison," Hayes said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who'd caught a subordinate doing something profoundly disappointing. "I believe you have something that belongs to us." "That depends on how you define us," Jake replied, noting that the crystal was now glowing brightly enough to read by. "Because if us means the people conducting illegal weapons experiments on civilian populations, then no, I don't think I do." Hayes sighed, the expression of a man dealing with an unexpectedly complicated day. "The device you're carrying contains classified information that could destabilize the peace between human and Velani space. Surely you understand the importance of preventing that outcome." "I understand that preventing people from learning about war crimes isn't the same thing as preventing war crimes," Jake said. "Though I'll admit, my military ethics training may have been more thorough than I originally thought." "This is not a matter for humor, Corporal. Commander, with all due respect, if I don't laugh about this situation, I'm going to start crying and nobody wants to see that. Besides, I've always found that impending doom is much more bearable when accompanied by inappropriate jokes." Zara stepped forward, her elongated ears flat against her head in what Jake had learned was the Velani equivalent of a combat stance. "Commander Hayes, the memory core contains evidence of violations of the Centauri Accords. Suppressing this information constitutes an act of war against the Velani Confederation." "The Accords are a piece of paper," Hayes replied. "What matters is preventing a conflict that could cost millions of lives. Sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. Difficult choices like covering up the murder of entire colonies." Jake felt the crystal's heat intensifying against his palm. "Because I may just be a corporal with a high school education, but that seems like the kind of difficult choice that makes all the subsequent choices significantly easier." Hayes nodded to his personnel, who began moving to flank Jake and Zara. "I'm sorry it's come to this, Corporal. You've been a good soldier, but some secrets are too important to remain hidden." "Actually," Jake said, pressing his palm against the communication hub's primary access panel, "I think some secrets are too important to stay hidden." The crystal's response was immediate and spectacular. Light erupted from Jake's hand as the memory core interfaced directly with the station's quantum communication array. And suddenly, the corridor was filled with holographic displays showing star charts, tactical analyses, and recorded communications. that painted a picture of systematic atrocities conducted by shadow organizations operating in both human and Velani space. Transmission initiated, the station's AI announced cheerfully. Quantum encrypted data burst sent to all registered diplomatic channels in human and Velani space. Estimated arrival time, 4 minutes, 37 seconds. Hayes stared at the holographic displays, his expression cycling through anger, resignation, and what might have been relief. You have no idea what you've just done. Probably saved a lot of lives, Jake replied. Though I'll admit, the career prospects are looking a bit uncertain at the moment. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from both ends of the corridor as station security, and what appeared to be Velani enforcement personnel converged on their location. Jake noticed that Zara was smiling, her ears standing upright in what he'd learned was an expression of satisfaction. The truth has a way of finding its audience, Zara said, regardless of who tries to prevent its delivery. Yeah, well, let's hope the truth also has a good legal defense fund, Jake muttered. Because I have a feeling the next few months are going to be very interesting from a judicial perspective. Commander Hayes holstered his sidearm, his shoulders slumping in defeat. You realize this means the end of both our careers. Maybe, Jake said, watching as the crystal's glow faded to a gentle pulse that felt almost like contentment. But I've always thought that some things are more important than job security. Besides, I was getting tired of staring at empty space all night. This whole experience has given me a new appreciation for excitement. As Velani and human security personnel sorted out the jurisdictional complications of arresting people for preventing war crimes, Jake reflected that 6 months ago, he would never have imagined himself at the center of an interstellar incident. The scared young corporal who'd been counting stars and drinking terrible coffee felt like someone he'd known in another life. So what happens now? Jake asked Zara as they waited for the various authorities to decide their immediate fate. Now the evidence is examined, the guilty are prosecuted, and perhaps our peoples learn to trust each other a little more, Zara replied. Though I suspect the paperwork will be extraordinary. Jake laughed, surprising himself with how genuine the sound was. You know, for a galaxy-spanning conspiracy involving illegal weapons and shadow organizations, this turned out to be remarkably straightforward. Almost makes me optimistic about the future. Optimism, Zara said, her ears twitching with what Jake now recognized as amusement, is perhaps the most dangerous force in the universe. It makes people do things like trust alien strangers and risk their careers to prevent wars. Good thing too, Jake replied, watching as the crystal finally went dark in his palm, its mission complete. Because pessimists never get to save the galaxy. They just complain about how impossible it is while other people do all the interesting work. And as they were escorted toward what would undoubtedly be the most complicated debriefing in the history of interstellar relations, Jake found himself looking forward to whatever came next. After all, once you've prevented a war by carrying an alien disco ball through maintenance tunnels, regular military life was bound to seem a little boring.